A lot of times people ask us whether they should move out of the family residence, and it's not necessarily an easy question because they're desperate. They're not getting along. There's a lot of stress. It's an unpleasant time of their life, but there are consequences to moving out of the family residence. What are some of the things we consider, Chris?
Well, custody, if there's children involved, is probably the biggest one. When the parties are living together, even though they may be having marital problems, they're sharing basically equal time with these children in the eyes of the law because they're not in separate households. And if one party moves out, and say that's husband who's working full time, there may be very limited contact between husband and his children after that move, maybe a few nights here and there, every other weekend, and that may be necessary because of the husband's work schedule. But what happens later on in the case is that becomes the permanent custody arrangement, or can become the permanent custody arrangement. It's very difficult to get back to equal status afterwards.
We recommend that people enter into a written agreement regarding custody before they move out of the house. If they can't get that, that presents some other problems. Often when people are in close contact, living in the same house, they're under a tremendous amount of stress and there's a risk of domestic violence. Is that a factor on whether people should move out of the house?
It is. I mean, if things are getting hot and there's a lot of verbal disputes, those could wind up into a physical dispute, or there could be false allegations of domestic violence raised. So, if things are getting too hairy, they might want to exit that house in order to avoid a physical altercation or allegations that had occurred.
And that becomes tricky because you got to weigh, I don't have a custody agreement, but I've got to protect myself by moving out of the house. And that's something that we would be happy to discuss with you and consult with you on what is the best option and how to protect yourself in this situation. Another factor is the house is probably the most valuable asset in most of our cases. And that asset is important, and the person that has exclusive possession of that asset has a lot of control over that asset. So I think that's a factor that we consider on whether somebody should move out of their residence.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, it's not going to affect the character of the property, meaning whether it's community or separate. So no one's going to lose any rights by moving out to getting their half of the house if it's community. But there are issues about who's going to pay the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, homeowners association dues, repairs, maintenance, utilities. Who's going to get the tax deductions for those things? Are we going to charge rent to the other spouse who's living there? Because they're using now exclusively a community asset. The other spouse doesn't get the access to that property. Do they owe rent to the spouse that moved out?
In the best of all possible worlds, it's better to resolve custody and support and allocation of debts before you move out of the family residence.